Ladies and gentlemen, get on the edge of your seats because this is an Action Sports Jax special presentation. Storytellers of the 904.
He's a Jacksonville staple. You might have tried to stump him a long time ago. A Hall of Fame voter as well. And now he's doing audiobooks, I think, for a living or something. We're catching up with him. It is Storytellers of the 904, and one of the great storytellers Jacksonville has ever had. We welcome in, I guess, a former rival of sorts, Sam Kouvaris, to the program.
Rival, competitor.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about that in a bit because I'm not sure everybody competes like they used to compete.
No, nobody does.
Right?
You're 100% right.
But welcome in, man. How you doing?
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Good. Thanks for thinking of me. It's interesting because even though they ended my television career and then I wrote for the paper for 3 years after that, every day somebody reminds me of my former life.
Yeah.
So it's nice. People are generally very complimentary. So,
well, hey, here's the deal. You become an institution, right, when you have been in a place for a long time.
You know as well as anybody, eventually you become a thing. You're not actually a person. You're just a thing.
And that means you get older, but you've been in a place a long time.
Yeah, that's right.
How proud of you of the longevity, before we get to the beginning stages, how proud of the longevity here in Jacksonville?
It's funny, Brent, because I think I've been asked that before, and I don't necessarily have pride about the longevity. I like to think that I went to work every day with the idea that I was going to do my job and try to get better at it every day. And it just so happened that it lasted for a long time. And I had a couple of opportunities to go other places, Miami, Tampa, Atlanta, and there was a time in my career where I thought that would be my next step. But the way my career, which started in 1981 here, worked out, the USFL became a reality, and that was a very big deal. We covered Florida, Florida State, Georgia, and Miami as if they were hometown teams. Mm-hmm. And if you look at that golden age of college football, it was Spurrier, Schnellenberger, Vince Dooley, Bobby Bowden. I mean, you're talking about and I don't know how many national championships games I covered between those four schools because they were always involved in it, and certainly involved in the Southeastern Conference. And then the quest for an NFL team began really in earnest after the USFL folded. And so, we just tried to get better and do the best job we could every day, be a part of the community, do some charity work, get involved with people, and be a part of it, not just be an alien who happens to be here for a couple of years. And it turned out, 40 years later, I was still standing. So
pretty cool. Cool. And part of the reason we love having you on Storytellers of the 904, there's a lot to get into. But let's go back to the beginning. Just when did you know you wanted to get into this arena in the sports world and maybe the TV world? How did that all start from where you were born to where you went to high school and eventually, obviously you were playing sports. I know you played football and others.
Born and raised in Baltimore. I went to high school and college in D.C. I'm still a Baltimore Colts fan. By the way, they don't exist, right? But I'm not an Indianapolis Colts fan. Kind of like Johnny Unitas told him, take me out of the record book. I never played in Indianapolis,
yes.
Right? Wore 16 at Clemson and told Trevor that. And to his credit, he didn't say when in the Stone Age or did you wear a leather helmet. He said, wow, small world, which I thought was a nice thing. They changed my number because the starting quarterback wore 16, and they changed my number to 7 when I was on the freshman team there. But played 3 sports in high school, got letters. I was a starting quarterback on the varsity when I was 14 years old. I mean, because my birthday's late. So, I mean, when I stuck my head in the huddle, I'm sure a couple of those guys had kids, I mean, so, I played all through high school. Had I gone somewhere else where they decided to redshirt me and all that kind of stuff, like the Naval Academy or somewhere that had recruited me pretty heavily, my life would have been different, but it all worked out fine. But while I was at Clemson, my second semester, I was a pre-med major. And I really enjoyed it. I was really a math and science nerd in college. I took advanced calculus, Who does
Who
that?
does
You know?
that?
Right, exactly.
Not sports guys.
Right, exactly. So my roommate Steve Young and I, we used to have a rule when we came back from wherever we were in the evening, we had a hat that had all of our advanced calculus tests cut up, and you'd have to pull a problem out and solve it before you went to bed. Right, that's pretty nerdy. I mean, that's big time nerdy. So, but and so they brought us together at the end of the semester and said, "Hey, we're getting rid of the pre-med program." And they said, 51% of the people get into med school didn't go to pre-med. And I said to myself, yeah, it's 49% did, So I majored in political science for a while for my second semester. And I took an elective called Introduction to Broadcasting. And at the end of the year, the professor pulled me aside and said, I've been teaching this for a long time, and you really have an aptitude for this. You should think about this as a career. And I was like, really? He said, and we're not going to have this program, but I can give you a list of 7 schools that have a television major, radio and television major. One of them happened to be Maryland, which I was going to transfer back to because I still had in-state residency there and I could afford it. And so went back, majored in radio, television, got my degree, got my minor in English and minor in phys ed. In phys ed, I never took a participation class until my last semester. I took golf, right? It was great. You just went and hit balls for an hour.
Good class.
But I got my degree in directing.
Really?
And I really wanted to be a director. And, I got A's in that, and I really excelled at that in school because Maryland had their own television station. And so I was kind of the lead director there my junior and senior year. And in fact, a guy that you may know, Mal Reddington, right, was a classmate of mine.
Wow.
Okay. He worked at Channel 4 for a long time. And, I was bartending in D.C., making a lot of money. And I was working in the shadow of 2 television stations, Channel 5 and Channel 9. Channel 5, which is now the Fox affiliate, was an independent, WTTG. And I used to serve cocktails to the directors and everybody. Got to know these guys. And Bobby Lynch, who was a director there, he said to me, you can't get into, and Ernie Bauer was at Channel 12. And they said, you can't get into this business here. Because, I've been there 35 years. I'm the new guy, right? Because it was, union dominated and all that. And,
now you can.
And now you can, right? And so he said, have you ever thought about being on TV? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, why don't you come in Sunday night? They did a 10 o'clock news on Sunday night. He said, why don't you come in Sunday night and we'll cut an audition tape for you. So I went down there after their 10 o'clock news. I sat in front of the camera, looked in the camera, and he said, when you see the red light go on, start talking. And I did it, and it was finished. He came down, and he stood in front of the desk, and he looked at me, and he went, oh, you actually want to do this? I said, yeah. He goes, everybody wants to be a sportscaster. Everybody acts like they want to be a sportscaster. He said, so we're going to do it again. When you talk about the Orioles, I have highlights of that game. We're going to run them. You look at the monitor. I also have golf highlights. When you talk about that, we'll run that and we'll put that on your resume tape. So he made my tape. I took my tape. I started driving south, made a copy of it. Charleston was about the 7th city I had been to, and I had been thrown out of, 25 stations.
Really?
But I walked into Channel 5 at 9, and the guy said, I like your tape, but I have a guy. Turned out to be Warren Pepper, who remains a friend of mine now. Went into Channel 4, which was the NBC at the time, and the guy said, I like your tape, but I have a guy. In fact, I just hired him from Channel 2. I don't know if they've hired somebody. I walked in there at 1 o'clock. They hired me at 3 and put me on the air at 6 o'clock.
First day.
Tom Allen was the news director, and I said to him subsequent to that, I said, obviously. And I tell people this when I'm still asked to speak like you are. Go to work for somebody who wants you to go to work for them because they see the things in you that you see in you, And he clearly, had enough confidence to put me on the air right away. And I was there 3 years, and I got the job here very similarly. I Was covering the Heritage up at Hilton Head.
Yeah.
Tom Watson won that year. Got in the car that Sunday night, drove down here. The job was in Broadcasting Magazine. You may not be old enough to remember that, but Broadcasting Magazine was the industry Bible, and all the jobs were in the back of it. And this job, the job at Channel 4, was in there. And I had sent a tape and never heard from him, so I drove down, and I was waiting for Steve Wasserman, the news director, when he came to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I said to the receptionist when he walked by, I said, "That's him." She goes, "Yeah, that's him." He came to the door, and I said, "Hey, Steve, I'm Sam Kouvaris from Channel 2 in Charleston. Just wanted to talk to you about your sports job real quick." And he looked at me and said, "Do we have an appointment?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I didn't think I made appointments at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning." And he started to close the door on me. And I stuck my foot in the door, and I said, "Listen, I got to be back to do the 6 o'clock news tonight. I just want 5 minutes of your time." He was like, "All right." Came back. He looked at my tape. He didn't like me. I didn't like him. He said my tape was vanilla. And I said to him, "You know, you news directors are all alike, right?" He was like, "What do you mean?" I said, "When you send out kind of an all call, we're sending you a tape just to show you that we have a job and we know what we're doing." I said, "I don't know what you're looking for. You're looking for a clown? Somebody throws bricks at the TV, or what? You know, what are you looking for?" And so we left. I called my wife and I said, "We don't have to worry about that. We're not going to work in Jacksonville." I got back that night after the 6 o'clock news, made a tape, thanked him, sent it back to him with a thing. "This might be a little more representative of what you're looking for. You know, it's the show that I did after we talked on that Monday." 6 weeks later, he called me, and I came down for a formal interview, and 6 weeks after that, they hired me.
How about that?
So,
wow.
And I thought
you almost weren't in Jacksonville.
No. And I thought I was, headed somewhere else, Wilmington, North Carolina or something. And, and then I thought I'd be here 3 years.
And move on. But just like most guys, my wife liked it here, so we're still here. Yeah. All right. So you've got to educate us on the landscape. You got to educate me on the landscape. Mm-hmm. In that time, I know what the sports scene was a little bit more like. Obviously, college town, you mentioned some of it. But what was the media landscape like? Florida Times Union's a big deal.
Yep.
I know us, CBS 47, Fox 30 didn't exist. You were a CBS affiliate with Channel 4 at that time in 1981.
We were not only we were the dominant CBS affiliate in the CBS chain.
In the country.
For the longest time, we were the 53rd market, 54th, 50th market. We delivered the 7th largest audience to the CBS Evening News every night. That's how many people watch Channel 4.
Crazy.
I mean, for anybody who knows anything about television ratings and share, I mean, we would get a 30 rating and a 70 share.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it was just kind of ridiculous.
Just think about it right now. I mean, what is good these days might even be like a 2, 3 rating,
a 2 or a 3,
and a 9-10 share.
Yeah,
I mean that's the golden age of TV too.
Of local
but you guys
television.
also were a legacy station,
exactly,
right? So you walked into a really good spot.
I walked into a great job, and continued it. I mean, I didn't fumble the ball.
Yeah.
There.
Who was there? Like who was Dan? Wasn't at First Coast yet.
I gave Dan his first job out of college.
Yeah. So you guys worked together a little bit. Give us a little bit more maybe on who else was in the market. At that time,
Channel 12 was the ABC at the time.
Okay.
And Channel 17 was the NBC. Matt Cooney was at Channel 12 and had been here. And
still in town.
Matt's still here. And, of course, his predecessor was a guy named Walt Dunbar, who kind of brought Channel 12 into the modern era. And Glenn Fisher was at 17, which was they didn't do news for the longest time. Then they did 15 minutes, and then eventually they created kind of a news department. And Glenn was a well-known, he'd worked a little bit at Channel 4. He was a well-known commodity, so they hired him to give them some gravitas on the air. My predecessor was a guy named Paul Cameron, who went to work in Charlotte and eventually anchored the news up there. And, of course, his predecessor, I mean, there was Phil Stone and a couple of other guys, but Dick Stratton was the guy. The guy.
Yeah.
For the longest time, who did sports, basically invented the Coach's Show with Ray Graves, and then eventually hosted the midday show with Virginia Adder Keys. So the Times Union probably had 15 sports reporters, 2 columnists. The late David Lamb and the late Greg Larson were the 2 lead kind of guys at the time. The late Gene Pullen ran the afternoon paper. He was the sports editor of the Jacksonville Journal, which was the afternoon paper. So, you talk about rivalries and competitors. I always considered the newspaper the competition for breaking stories.
Yeah.
They have a whole different format. There are certain stories that are better in print, and there are certain stories that are better with the immediacy and the rawness of television. But in terms of breaking stories, they were always kind of the people I saw as the competition.
Was it super competitive? Because you got some personalities there now, right? And Larson and Lamb, and probably yourself as a younger guy, right? I've got to believe that's pretty competitive.
I've been in 3 fist fights as an adult. 2 of them were with Larson. So
was that on the softball field or was that
baseball? Yeah. But yeah, there was David used to write about me fairly often. He would make fun of me, when I would beat them on stories, they would figure out how they could, and even Joe DeSalvo, who I just saw at Gene Frenette's retirement party, when I beat them to the Tom Coughlin story on a Sunday night, they wrote about me the next day because I did get I said that Coughlin had taken Boston College to a bowl game 3 years in a row, and actually he had only taken them 2 out of the last 3. And so they wrote that in that's the kind of pettiness.
Wow.
Subsequent to that, Joe apologized to me and said, wasn't my finest hour.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, that was, whether this plays before or after, we had Pete Briscoe on.
Yeah,
and that was a big deal, right? The Coughlin thing.
I mean,
how did that come
Pete
about?
Was so mad at me.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. What you got to, again, the landscape is so different. It's not the internet. You're not social media. You don't have. You're not tweeting it out. For a newspaper guy, if he doesn't have it,
he doesn't have it.
I mean, or if he has it at 11 o'clock at night, it really doesn't do him any good until the next morning.
Well,
he's got to hope you don't have it or another TV doesn't have it at that time.
If you remember, and this was before your time. There were 2 news cycles. There was the morning paper and the evening news.
Yeah.
Okay, and those were the kind of the 2 news cycles. Now it's a 24-hour news cycle. But as you well know, and you're one of the few guys left, being a good reporter and actually being an actual journalist is about creating relationships and getting and letting people know that you're as much a professional as they are in their profession, and that there are, as I've said 1,000 times, there are a million things that have gone in these eyes and in these ears that have not come out of this mouth, or there'd be a lot more divorces and firings in this town, okay? So, you got to earn people's trust. Jake Godbold used to call me every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 and tell me what was going on, knowing I would never break his confidence, but it gave me real context to my reporting. So I was kind of ahead of the game, certainly while he was mayor, because every Tuesday and Thursday I got an update, and it wasn't just about the sports; it was about where the roads were being built. Where is the airport going to move? I mean, there was talk that the airport was going to move to the west side, maybe to the south side. I mean, there were, you get, as you know, you get more involved than just in the sports, because you're in a newsroom and you're in that environment, and the only way you're any good at this is if you have that natural curiosity. So. I created a lot of relationships, and one of the relationships I had was with the president of Touchdown Jacksonville, and then subsequently the president of the club, which was David Selden at the time. And so I used to meet with David twice a week, and just he would bounce things off of me, because I had been in town forever, not forever, but 15 years, let's say, at the time. And I also had a lot of connections nationally to guys. I mean, I've been covering the Super Bowl since 1984. So, I had a lot of connections. So he would bounce things some off me. And I remember one night I was sitting there and I said, do you think when you hire a coach that you're going to hire somebody established? Because Lou Holtz and Mike Ditka both called me and asked me to speak on their behalf to Wayne Weaver. And I said, or do you think you're going to make your own star? And he got very nervous when I said that. And he had to tell, his lip would quiver, literally. And he looked at me and he went, I think we're going to make our own star. And I said to him, then you should hire Tom Coughlin from Boston College. And he went, and I said, listen, when you hire him, I only wanted one show in front of everybody else. And he said, okay. And that was a Wednesday. And my parents were in town Sunday night. He called me at 10:40. Before cell phones, cell phones were kind of new. 1993.
They were big.
1993. They were huge. You look like you were in World War II. And he called me up and he said, we're hiring Coughlin tomorrow. I said, okay. And I never forget, I hung up, called the station. I got in my car. And you've done this, put your shirt on in the car, trying to tie your tie in the car while you're driving to the station to get on the air. And I was the lead star. I made it in time I literally walked in and walked right on the set and sat down. I was out of breath. And I said, the Jaguars tomorrow are going to hire Tom Coughlin as their head coach. He beat Notre Dame, if you remember, after they had just beaten Florida State. Mm-hmm. And he took Boston College to 3 state bowl games. He's worked in the NFL. He's passing coordinator for the Eagles, worked for Bill Parcells, blah, 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 blah. Right? That made the guys at the paper very mad.
Is that your biggest break?
We broke the story when the team, and I can tell you that story. That's one of my favorite stories. But
go for it.
So I had made a relationship with Touchdown Jacksonville and a relationship with Wayne Weaver. First night I met Wayne was at Epping Forest. I got invited there. Showed up. I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing a kind of a olive green suit and a kind of an eggshell shirt. And I remember it because it poured rain. And I don't know if you've been to Epping, but there's no cover from the parking lot. So I was soaked. And I walked in, and there were like 10 people sitting around the table. Wayne, Dolores, Tom and Betty Petway, Ronnie and Ann Weaver, Selden, there were a couple people there, maybe not Selden yet. And Wayne, he said, I'm Wayne Weaver. I said, hi, Wayne, I'm Sam Kouvaris. Thanks for keeping our dream alive. And he said, don't be silly. What can I get you? I said, Dalwhinnie on the rocks with a twist. And the table broke out in laughter. And I said, did I say something wrong? And they said, no, you said something right. That's what Wayne just ordered. So we both found out that we had an interest in Scotch. He had just been on the Orient Express through Scotland to do a Scotch thing. So we talked about that. But so I had a relationship with them. So we followed every move that was made, from the ups and downs and all that, to when they brought Wayne, when Ronnie convinced Wayne to come on board. And we traveled with them to all the NFL owners meetings, all the different things. And at that NFL owners meeting, you're hanging out with the Jacksonville contingent, so you get to know them. I mean, you're having meals with them, you're having cocktails with them. I mean, you're getting the inside stuff. A lot of it you can't report, but it really does give you context to your reporting. And so Wayne was very mad. People forget this, that when in October of '93, they announced that Charlotte was getting a franchise and that they were deferring the other as 30 days. They
delayed it about a month,
They were specifically doing that so St. Louis could get their act together. Ask Mark Lamping. He was part of the St. Louis effort, right? But St. Louis had 3 competing factions there, and they could never come together. So consequently, because Wayne was such a marketing genius with 9 West and how he had built factories in Brazil and in South America, and they liked, he was really the first guy to bring a lot of like color and stuff to women's fashion, at least shoes. They really liked Wayne. They asked him, in fact, in that month to take over to accept a team and take it to St. Louis. And he said, I'm tied to these Jacksonville guys and my brother lives here, so no. And so they gave Wayne a team here in Jacksonville. And of course, when he sold it to Shad, Bill Foley is the one who had put up enough money to buy it. But he would not guarantee Wayne that he would keep the team here. And so Wayne said, I'm sorry, Bill, you probably don't have enough money to buy this team. Bill Foley's got plenty of money, not to worry. But
he was keeping it here.
Yeah, exactly. The team was, committed to stay here. So we go back there, and there's 5 different groups, 2 from Baltimore. One guy was named Boogie Wineglass. He started the women's clothing called Merry-Go-Round. The Glazers, by the way, represented Baltimore in that situation. St. Louis, was obviously represented by Kroenke and that group, Dan Deerdorf, and Memphis, the Memphis Showboats.
Yeah.
Pepper Rogers was kind of their guy, and so the NFL said, "All right, we're going to make a decision," and they sent the 5 groups into the towers at the Airport Hyatt in Chicago, and so we all went. The media went. We went with the Jacksonville contingent. They gave us this big suite, and the other 4 contenders also had suites. And so we're sitting there, and a security guard comes in and says, "All right, all media has to leave. Now's the time." Well, the only 2 people that were in there were me and Gene Fournette, right? And I was sitting next to Tom Petway on the couch, and the plans for the new stadium were in front of me. So I picked them up and put them in front of me, and I looked over at Tom, and all he did was laugh. So I was like, all right, he's not going to rat me out. And I hear Gene going, "The Kouvaris is still in there." And they closed the door on me. So now I'm in the room, and I'm mingling with people, and I'm talking. By the way, cell phones were in their infancy, but they were working. And so I'm standing by the front door of this suite, and it's me, Selden, Wayne and Dolores and me. And the door bursts open, and it's Ron Weaver. And he is as red as that drink. He is totally red-faced. And I said, "Ronnie, are you all right?" And he looks at his brother and goes, "You're getting an NFL team." And I, of course, spoke out of turn, young, impetuous, and said, "How do you know that?" And he goes, "I just saw the chairman of the finance committee, and they've approved Jacksonville, and the full membership has never turned down their recommendation. You're getting a team." And I looked at Selden, I said, "I think I should go." He said, "Yeah." I went over to the window, and I had one of those brick cell phones that looked like a World War II thing, and I held the antenna up against the window, and I dialed our news director's direct line, and she answered it, and I said, "Nancy?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Tangerine." She went, "What?" I said, "Tangerine." She went, "Can you cuss on this show, by the way?"
Yeah, sure.
Holy shit. I said, "I'll see you on the air." I hung up, went. Now, here's the bad part of the story. Bad, good, competitive, right? I walk out. I'm on the 25th floor. I walk down the hall. There's a couple security guards. The bank of 2 elevators, right? Hit the down on both of them. The one opens, and a young producer named Mel, young girl, literally, steps out. She's from Channel 12. And she goes, "Hey, Sam, where are they?" And I said, "Yeah, they're down the hall there. Just go down there." Knowing full well the security guards are going to stop her.
Yeah.
So I held this elevator. This one opened. I hit all the buttons. I got in mine, and I hit 2 and 1. When it stopped at 2, I hit all the rest of the buttons. Figured this might give me like a 6-minute head start, maybe.
Yeah.
Hit 1, got down, went over, and as I walked to meet Tom Wills, we knew through a late-night excursion where the T-shirts and the hats were for all the teams. And I walked by that closet and opened the door, and the Memphis stuff was still in there, and the 2 Baltimore was in there, and the St. Louis stuff was in there, and all the Jacksonville stuff was gone. Mm. And so that, I was like, all right, that's all the confirmation I need. And I went in, and I was standing there, and Tom said to me, "Are you really going to say this?" And I said, and they came live, and Tom said, and to his credit, he said, "We're in Chicago with breaking news, and Sam Kouvaris has something to report." And I said, "The Jacksonville Jaguars are about to be the 30th franchise in the National Football League." And Jake Godbold almost fainted at home. It was pretty special, I thought.
Yeah, and that goes. There's so many things to get into, but that changes the whole landscape in Jacksonville. Of covering sports.
Sure.
Right, the way your job is. I've said this already with Gene Fournette and other people that we've had on. You're talking about covering Miami and Georgia on a weekly basis, and obviously the Gators and Knowles and still big, but JU basketball is a huge thing.
Huge.
But it's obviously resources start going toward the NFL team.
Without question.
And it really changes kind of the paradigm of how you cover Jacksonville sports.
And rightfully so. And, I mean, like I said, I really believe I worked in the golden age of local television.
You did.
But the problem about local TV now is that they stopped listening to the viewers and started listening to the consultants. And when you're covering, when you've got an NFL football game at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we walk in at whatever we walk in, 5:30 to do the 6 o'clock news, or you're live from over there, and they say, well, you're paid $6. Well, what 5 stories are more important than 70,000 people who have spent a minimum of $200 apiece to spend 6 hours in traffic and at a game? What story, other than a football game, would you not make the lead story? I mean, if 70,000 people gathered downtown for anything and paid that kind of money, it would be your lead story.
Yeah.
Well, and as I said to the news directors on more than one occasion, they would say, quote, "It's an effing football game." And I would say that's where you're missing the boat. It's a cultural event, and they happen to play a football game. Same thing with players. Players is a cultural event. Florida, Georgia is a cultural weekend. They happen to play a football game there.
Yeah.
But it's got, they can't get that through their heads, and that's why nobody's watching anymore.
Yeah, that's a comment that's been made by many sports
Probably
people.
within these walls.
Somewhere over the years.
Exactly.
Not that we can complain here. We've got 24-hour sports network, right?
I'm with you. I'm with you.
A 60-second break, but when we return with Sam Kouvaris, how he got the NFL Hall of Fame vote here in Jacksonville, and his thoughts on Freddie T making it to Canton someday when Storytellers of the 904 continues. Most of us know how to throw. But you need to know what to throw. I'm not talking about footballs, baseballs, softballs. We're talking about those items you need to recycle. Republic Services explains it easy. Recycling simplified. 1. Know what to throw. When in doubt, throw it out. 2. Empty, clean, and dry those materials. It takes an extra minute, but it makes a big difference. And 3. Don't bag it. This makes the recycling process faster and more efficient. This is a look at the Republic Services North Florida Recycling Center. You can make this process even more efficient. By utilizing those 3 steps, Republic Services can help you become a better recycler in your home. Learn more at recyclingsimplified.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, get on the edge of your seats because this is an Action Sports Jax special presentation. Storytellers of the 904.
Sam Kouvaris with us, Storytellers of the 904. All right, part of that whole thing, you become the Hall of Fame voter for Jacksonville. And I don't know how that came about. I know everybody has one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think each representative team. But how did you become that guy and I guess keep that? Is that a lifetime contract or?
So Wayne Weaver called me one day, and David Selden was also on the phone, and he said, "Sam, I want you to be the Jacksonville representative to the Pro Football Hall of Fame." And I said, "Wayne, I can't tell you how flattered I am." I said, "But as you know, generally that's the beat writer from the paper, and so I think you should offer it to him. But you and I will always know that you called me first." And he started laughing, and he said, "What, do you think I hadn't already thought of that?" I said, "Be careful what you wish for." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because it's like a Supreme Court appointment. You can't get rid of me once you appoint me." He goes, "I know that." He goes, the Hall, I'm sure if Shad called up the Hall and said, "Get rid of Sam," they'd do it, but, for a price. And so that's kind of how it happened. And when I got on the committee, there were 30 people on the committee, 32, because it was the 30 franchises. The president of the Pro Football Writers Association, and one at-large person. And I can tell you, Brent, and you may have had this experience in your career as well. When I walked into that room, I was 34 years old. And when I walked in that room, John Stedman, Edwin Pope, Tom Coughlin, Will McDonough, Jack Buck, I mean, it was the titans of our industry,
legends
across the board who were making that. And we used to have continental breakfast. The meeting started at 7. The announcement was at noon. And it's now grown to that there are 50 people on the committee, one for every team, and then 18 at-large people. And we have 2 full meals, and then there's a freaking TV show 2 weeks later. So, I mean, it's totally changed, and it may change again sometime in the near future. But it's a tremendous honor to do that. You know, people roundly criticized me a lot.
You got hammered quite a bit.
Oh, a lot. And all that tells me is that they don't understand the process, because the way the process works, I mean, as much as I wish I, determined whether Tony got in earlier or whether Fred's going to get in, or whether Jimmy's a candidate, I'm one of 50, and
I'm not proud of it. I've had to defend you at times.
Well, thank you. I mean, the next person who has this is going to say to themselves, well, Sam wasn't that bad actually, after all.
How much influence do you think you have? Like, at the end of the day, it takes a little bit for Tony to get in. One that's got to be pretty awesome,
a lot, actually.
Right? And you're right, you're one of 50.
Yeah.
But was the compounding of your tell and your pitch?
There were 6 years where I had to make a presentation to Tony, where he was what they call a finalist, right, for 6 years. And every year I would try to take a slightly different tact about, and if you think back, and I can recite it chapter and verse, Tony played in the golden age of tackles in the NFL. You think back, Gary Zimmerman and Jonathan Ogden and Willie Rofe. And I mean, there are 5 guys that he played at the same time with who all were in the Hall of Fame. But the 3 years that they all played together, the all-pro team, the consistent tackle on that was Tony Boselli. So clearly the players and the coaches all thought he was the best of the bunch, and the other guys rotated around the other position. So, after telling that story, explaining that, Boselli played 97 games in the NFL, including playoffs, does that sound like a lot? No, but, 25% of the Hall played less than 100 games. 25
bigger number than most think.
Paul Hornung, how many games? I mean, there's an iconic NFL name. Played 105 games, less than a half season more than Boselli. And once they let Kenny Easley and Terrell Davis in, who had very short careers, there was no reason to keep Boselli out. And by that time, I could tell it was just going to be a matter of time before we got to a year, because there's a recency bias on the committee. There's a rush for a lot of younger voters to put in, this guy has to be a first ballot guy.
Larry Fitzgerald.
First ballot means nothing in football. Baseball, yeah, probably. Football means nothing. And if you make it as a finalist, you have about an 88% chance of eventually getting in the Hall. So, although last year they made the process even harder, more difficult, there were 9 finalists, and it was a class of 4. I can tell you, when we get it down to 15 modern era players and we talk about those 15, and then it used to be that we voted for your top 10. So when I eliminated 5 guys out of that 15, they might be borderline guys, or, if they're first year of eligibility, and they're going to have more chances. Boselli was eliminated on the first ballot, I think, the first 2 or 3 years, because guys were like, he's going to have more shots.
Yeah.
But from 10 to 5, I'm cutting 5 Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
Guys I know should be in.
They should be in, or
and,
will get in.
The people who criticized me so roundly, the answer always is, okay, well, who in that class should I take out to put Tony in? Because you can't just add somebody. I mean, it's 5 or less.
Yeah.
So if I'm putting Tony in, am I going to keep Bob Hayes out?
Yeah.
Michael Irvin? Peyton Manning?
They're all worthy.
You tell me. They're all worthy. And when I make that vote from 10 to 5, I mean, it's really hard. It's hard because I know I'm eliminating 5 guys who, and it is a life changer. You put HOF behind your name,
no doubt.
You're making a lot more money with your autograph and speaking engagements, and You're in demand. I mean, it's a big deal.
Will Fred Taylor get in?
They've made it. As I said, this past year they've made it more difficult. And if you look at it now, and this is public knowledge, instead of voting from 10 to 5, we vote from 10 to 7, and then they ask us to vote for our top 5. Well, when you have 50 people voting, it fragments it so much that I think it makes it difficult for somebody who played in a small market like this, who had consistent greatness, but, was only a Pro Bowler one time. But, I mean, and this was the argument last year. One year it was Fast Willie Parker. He's a great player for 2 years. Chris Johnson had 2 great years. Priest Holmes had 3 or 4 great years. Fred Taylor had 10 years of greatness, consistently. The 1 year he was hurt. But those 10 years of greatness made him, now 17th on the all-time rushing list, and 14 of those guys in front of him are in, and Adrian Peterson and Frank Gore are going to get in.
That's right.
So, I mean, so is 16 the cutoff? But, and I always use the example, as a rookie, Fred Taylor had gained 1,660-some yards, scored 17 touchdowns, which led the league, by the way, in touchdowns as a rookie. The same year, Peyton Manning was a rookie, led the league in interceptions. And Randy Moss had 1,313 yards and tied Fred Taylor for the league lead in touchdowns with 17. So both of them are all rookies, which is probably, it's what you would think. But Randy Moss was the Rookie of the Year. Okay, maybe so. But when you drill down and you look at the voting, Randy Moss got 94% of the votes for Rookie of the Year.
Should have been way closer.
How is that possible? Fred Taylor had statistically a better year.
Yeah.
Well, Randy Moss caught 3 touchdowns on Thanksgiving Day against the Dallas Cowboys on national television. The same weekend, Fred Taylor played against Cincinnati in a point-to-point broadcast that was not sold out in Cincinnati. So the only people who saw it were in Jacksonville, Florida that weekend. And that's kind of an example of literally no one saw Fred Taylor play. And you talk to Ray Lewis, you talk to Marcus Allen, you talk to Thurman Thomas, I mean, they all are like, Fred Taylor, I mean, Troy Polamalu told me, I called him, and it's kind of funny because he answered me in Greek. I called him up and I said, Troy, how do you have Greek on your phone? And he said, oh, my wife's Greek. I said, oh. He said, but it's kind of funny. I'm talking to you, and we're going to see my big fat Greek wedding. And I said, that's kind of funny. He said, listen, I'm going to the movies, but I just want to tell you, Fred Taylor's the best player I ever played against. I said, wait a minute. That's a massive statement.
Yeah, it is.
He goes, I knew you were going to call me, and I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of time, but that's what I want to tell you. He goes, anytime I was on the field, of the 22 players, Fred Taylor was always the best player. He goes, he was always. Ray Lewis said to me, how well do you know Fred? I said, since he was a teenager, in Belgrade. He goes, so you know that stupid little smile he's got? I said, yeah. He goes, he'd come through the line. He said, and we'd tackle him. He'd be 8 yards downfield. He said, and when we were at the bottom of the pile, this is back when you could kind of give him the business.
Yeah.
And I'd always give him the business on the bottom of the pile, and I'd be talking to him in his ear. He said he'd get up, he'd start back toward the huddle, and before he got to the line of scrimmage, he'd look back at me and he'd go, I'll be back. And he'd go and get back. I said, that is so Fred. He goes, you know him. I said, that is absolutely him. So does he deserve more consideration? Yes. But the fact that he played here, if he played in New York or the Jaguars won a Super Bowl or two, I think he'd probably already be in. But there's a big market bias and certainly a bias about championships.
I assume that will impact Jimmy Smith as well. What about Tom Coughlin, real quick? Because of the Giants,
Coughlin's going to get in.
He's going to get in, right?
I mean, it may be a few years because, again, last year Mike Holmgren was a finalist among the coaches, but was eliminated in favor of, not another coach, but a senior player.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's kind of it's a hard process.
It is.
The process is, and I know that they continue to kind of tweak it, but I can tell you that this year it's going to be the same as last year.
All right, I've got a million things to get to. Stump Sam, whose idea would it come from, and why was it so big?
Before the internet, okay.
So you couldn't Google the answer.
Couldn't Google the answer. And they were looking for a place to put me in the 5:30. And Nancy Shaffron was our news director at the time, and I knew Nancy pretty well. And newsrooms are smaller and closer, and she knew that I had a lot of stupid stuff rolling around in my head. And she said, "What if we ask you a question every day on the air? Are you willing to do that?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And there was a sitcom about news on TV, and they had a thing on there called Stump Stew.
Okay.
And in that sitcom, they ask him a question, and he doesn't know the answer, and he's so embarrassed he has a heart attack and dies on the set. Oh. By the way, that's was part of the storyline. But she said, I think we're going to call it Stump Sam. They created a graphic. They put a camera in the newsroom, had me sit there. What they found over time, because if you asked a plumber about plumbing every day, they'd know most of the answers. If I asked you something every day, you'd know most of the answers. I mean, there was a lot of, stuff. I remember the first question Tom Wills asked me. Got it wrong, by the way.
What was it?
In April of 1969, the Montreal Expos hosted the first Major League Baseball game outside of the continental United States. Who did they play?
Oh, wow.
That's
deep.
Yeah, but think about it, Brent. Instantly, at least I did, and because it's I was a kid, I was 14, 13. Expos play in the National League.
Yeah.
So now you're eliminating all the American
League. Yeah, we didn't have
teams.
interleague then.
Right. All right. Expos played in the National League East. All right. So now you're like, okay, Pittsburgh, Philly, New York, St. Louis, you can probably name off the top of your head. So I say, within about 2 seconds, I don't know, they either played a traditional team like the Cardinals, who had a massive national following. They seem like the Cardinals are always in the game of the week, on Saturdays, or a major market team like the Mets. And Tom says, well, which one? And I was like, wait a minute, I just got it from 28 to 2 like that. He goes, well, I said, I don't know, probably the Cardinals because they were setting up. He goes, yeah, April 7th, they played the New York Mets.
You almost had
so
it.
I got it wrong. And then in 1995, he asked me the most basic sports trivia question you can get. And I think he was just trying to give me a layup because we were so involved in getting the Jaguars started and all that. Who's the only guy to throw back-to-back no-hitters in Major League history? Even casual sports fans know the answer. For the life of me, Brent, I couldn't. And to Tom's everlasting credit, he said on the air, "Football overload." Clearly,
gave it out.
I couldn't get it. Johnny Vandermeer, obviously. Yeah. So,
and that's.
Anyway.
So did you ever cheat on it?
So people ask me that all the time. You're the camera, right? I don't know if you've ever been in the newsroom there at Channel 4, but when you look slightly to the left of where that camera was, that's where 95 was. And so, you're trying to clear your mind because, as you well know, because people do this to you all the time, the hardest thing when you're answering a trivia question is to get the answer that you know is wrong out of your head, right?
That's a good call.
It's the hardest thing, right? So
remember that at the next trivia night.
Exactly. So I would try to clear my head by watching the traffic going by. And then sometimes just I'd be wandering and I'd kind of look this way. And people would go, oh, you're looking for the answer. And actually, the weather department was over there, and they didn't know anything. I mean, I don't know about your weather department here, but what weather department has $4 million worth of equipment and no window, right? You're doing the weather. I mean, how about a window in the weather department?
That's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, they don't have one
They
either.
don't have a window? No. I mean, it's sunny out. I'm looking out the window. Anyway.
It's a good call.
Right, but if I went like this, my guys in the back, I was looking for help.
Yeah.
And usually I'd get this, I got about 90% of them right. And, there's a lot of kind of sports trivia. There's Bob Costas is probably a little better than I am. I heard him answer a couple of questions that I didn't know the answer to one night. I know the answers now.
Yeah. What's interesting about you, you do a lot of different things. Like you mentioned, even you weren't into this at 10, 11, 12 years old. You were going to be a pre-med student and then poli-sci, and then you fall into this. You like the directing part of it. But, I mean, you play musical instruments, right? You've,
I think, the trumpet since the 4th grade.
Done theater, right?
Yep.
Can sing a little bit?
Still sing professionally, yeah.
Yeah, so.
I practice my guitar every day, by the way.
Do you really?
Yeah. And I occasionally get gigs with some actual professional musicians. But, if somebody offers you to wear a tuxedo, drink scotch, stand in front of a 16-piece band in front of 1,000 people and sing Sinatra, say yes. Okay.
Guess what? This guy ain't saying yes.
Because it's pretty fun, I can tell you that.
What a rush.
And I did that, a lot. And Les DeMurrow, who has a big band up in Fernandina, a lot of times he'll hire me to be the lead male vocalist. And back then, the St. John's River City Band would need a lead vocalist. And that came about because they used to have a thing called Celebrity Showcase, and I did it once. And Sam Fricano, who was the head of music at Disney and also ran the Army Field Band, was running the St. John's River City Band, thanks to Ira Koger, who hired him here. It was the patron of the band. And Ira, by the way, invented office parks here in Jacksonville, Florida. And after I did the Celebrity Showcase, Sam Fricano said, you can actually do this. Maybe would you be willing to come help us out? And, absolutely. So, they pay me $100 and we'd do, 15, 20 tunes. And let me tell you, the UNF music department is internationally known. So you get a chance to stand in front of those guys and play. Say yes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. But before I get into like a lightning round of questions, you got to give us the finish at Channel 4. Sam Kouvaris tells that story when we return after 60 seconds on Storytellers of the 904. When it's time to get a new car for anyone in your family, just remember, nobody but Nimnick, the #1 Buick GMC dealer in Jacksonville. Get the latest price breaks on 2023 and 2024 models or the newest 2025 vehicles in the showroom on Phillips Highway, or shop online at nimnickbuickgmc.com 24 hours a day. GMC Sierras, Yukons, and the redesigned Acadias, or get the all-new redesigned line with Buicks. It's nobody but Nimnick, and part of the reason why is this is a first-class buying experience here at Nimnick Buick GMC. You're not just a customer, you're a friend. This is about getting a vehicle that best fits you and getting you on the road, and also helping you and your family down the road. Nimnick has a treating you right guarantee, courtesy, respect, fairness. The most Buicks, GMCs, and Jacksonville's only Car Bravo dealer, nobody but Nimnick. Who has put in the most years and stands behind a better experience? Nobody but Nimnick. GMC. We are professional grade.
Ladies and gentlemen, get on the edge of your seats because this is an Action Sports Jax special presentation. Storytellers of the 904.
Before I get into like a lightning round of questions, you got to give us the finish at Channel 4. And it could probably be an hour story in its own, but I don't think unceremonious comes to mind, but maybe not as ceremonious as it could have been.
I'm going to tell you one quick story before we get to that, all right, if you don't mind.
Well, you got it.
I know you got time constraints, but 1983 is as early as I can remember when Jacksonville was on a quest to somehow be recognized by a national sports organization. Jake Godbold had done a survey and found that people who lived in Jacksonville didn't like living here. The tolls, the smell, the paper mills, the chemical plant, all of that. And he felt like that if we could garner a national, in this case, National Football League team, that, and Colt Fever had happened in 1979. So beginning in about 1982, the city was on a quest to host a Super Bowl. It was more of a thing to kind of get in front of the NFL owners. So we go to Washington for the NFL owners meeting, and we're staying at the L'Enfant Plaza downtown. We're not staying there. That's where the meetings are, right?
TV money wasn't that good.
Yeah, no. It was good for the people owning the place, but it wasn't good for us, right? And so I'm standing outside the door of the meeting room where Jacksonville's going to make their presentation. I remember I was wearing khaki-colored slacks and a double-breasted navy blue suit, and jacket. And Jake Godbold walked by, and he was the last guy of the Jacksonville contingent, and literally grabbed me by the lapel and drugged me in the room with him. I'm convinced he just wanted another guy in a coat and tie from Jacksonville in the room because I just stood there. But it was owners and general managers only. So there's 56 at the time, guys, only guys. Culver House is sitting over there. He's from here, owns the Tampa Bay Bucks, wearing a pair of boots. He's got his feet up on the table, and he's smoking a cigar. It's now, it's Al Davis. It's Pete Rozelle. It's everybody you ever heard of in the league. And they make the presentation, and it goes pretty well. Like 2 or 3 owners spoke on Jacksonville's behalf. Culver House said to me later, he said, you're not going to get a Super Bowl, but at some point we're going to take the championship games to neutral sites because they had just had the game between Cincinnati and San Diego that was 66 below, if you remember. Oh. San Diego was the best team in the league that year, and they couldn't even get to the Super Bowl because they played in Cincinnati, and it was colder than the Ice Bowl. So anyway, Jake and Don, who was his chief of staff, and I are sitting in the lobby of the L'Enfant Plaza, and we're sitting there, and the meeting breaks up, and Billy Sullivan owned the Patriots at the time.
Yes, he did.
And he walks by, and he was kind of a P.T. Barnum kind of guy. And I'm sitting closer to you, closer. Jake is closer to me than you are, and Don's sitting here. And Billy walks behind him, looks at me, and I go, "Hey, Billy." And he puts his hand on Jake's shoulder, and he goes, "Hey, Jake, you're not going to get a Super Bowl." And we all kind of slumped, and he goes, "But you think you'd be interested in hosting the Michael Jackson tour?" And Jake leans over to me and goes, "Michael Jackson?" I said, the hair, the glove. He goes, "The kid from the Jackson 5?" I said, "Well, he's not a kid anymore, but yeah, tell him yes." Don looks at me, I go, I'm not 30 years old yet, right? I'm still in my late 20s. So I said, so he goes, "Yeah." Billy says, "Come with me." So we walk up the stairs to Billy's suite. We get to the door. He looks at Don and I and says, "I'm going to talk to Jake. You guys mind waiting in a hallway?" "Nope, we're fine." Some, muscle guy was out there with us, making sure we didn't listen on the door. 15 minutes goes by. They open the door. They're shaking hands. Sullivan walks by me. Jake looks at me and says, "We're going to host the first Michael. I think it was the Victory Tour, maybe.
It's huge.
We're gonna host the first Michael Jackson." I said, "No kidding." We're walking down the hall. Jake looks at me and he goes, "He offered me 3 dates, but I told him I didn't think so." I said, "You tell him we want all 3." And he goes, "Billy, we'll take all 3 of those dates." And Sullivan never turned around. He goes like this, "You got it." I went to the house phone and called Tom. I said, "We're not getting a Super Bowl." He goes, "Oh." I said, "We are hosting the first 3 Michael Jackson dates of the tour." Tom goes, "We have a new lead." So
that's a cool story. But hey, by the way, later on, just a footnote to that, I think Patriots kind of in play to maybe even bounced around coming to Jacksonville.
Oh, there was some talk about that
because
Robert Kraft bought the team.
Yeah, because they were looking to move to Hartford and other places as well. But so
Providence.
They were floating that around as potential, as more, but probably bait.
We were used by Houston, by New Orleans. In fact, Jack Dimitri, whose sons, of course, still are in business here in town. Jack Dimitri threw his checkbook on the table to John Meekum, who owned the Saints at the time, and said, "Did you say $50 million?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a check in there for $50 million. We'll take the team." And Meekum went, "Well, I got some apartment buildings and I got some shopping centers." And of course, Jack was very direct. And he said, "Listen, not in such nice terms. You said, $50 million. There's a check in there for $50 million." And so that was probably as close. Of course, Irsay came here in '79. Bill Bidwell came here of the Cardinals.
Yep.
So there were a lot of
flirtations.
Lot of flirtations. Jacksonville did not have the infrastructure, even in the stadium at the time, to really be able to host an NFL team, and that's why they had to. Once they got the team in '93, it took them 2 years to rebuild the stadium before they could start in '95. But my departure was unceremonious, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's kind of, I think it was kind of personal. They always say, well, it's not personal, it's business, but it's always personal. And the guy who was running the place at the time, decided he was going to get rid of me. And of course, shortly thereafter, he left here and took a job in Detroit. And when his secretary called me to tell me that, I said, I bet he thinks that's a promotion, But they lost. You were the beneficiary. They lost 25% of their audience when they got rid of me. And shortly thereafter, maybe 3 or 4 years, they asked John Gaughan and Mary Bear to leave, even though nobody reported it that way. But come on, they both retired on the same day. At the end of May, for people who don't know, May is a big rating period that they sell on for most of the year. And I remember writing John, and he said he must have signed an NDA because he said to me, someday I'll tell you the story. And I said, I hope you maximized your departure, because all they told me was, there's the door, and we hope it's snowing, basically. Which, I knew it was a bad business when I got into it, and it confirmed it, at the end of my career as well. But it was about 5 years before I anticipated leaving. But my contract was up. They offered me 1/6 of what I was making to work 42 weeks a year with no access to my pension, and no outside work without their permission. And, they had offered Rob Sweeting a chance to stay, but also have access to his pension. So there were a lot of precedents around it, but they just said no to that. And, I was making a lot of money, and they offered me 1/6 of that. And I said I'd do it for 1/3. Guess which shows they wanted me to do? All the revenue producers, right? The ViStar thing, the Farrah and Farrah thing, all the things that people are willing to pay for. And when I told them I wouldn't do it, they just got really mad at me because, in our business, management kind of thinks that your ego is the thing that drives you from being on TV. And for anybody who's been around like you have for a while, if you've lasted in the business, that's got nothing to do with it. It's zero. I mean, you have zero ego because you're just going to work every day and doing your job. The guys who have the big ego and so forth, they don't last. They're flitting around from one market to the next because they wear thin. Yeah. And they're chasing the next dollar. So they just said, then you don't work here anymore. And I said, okay. And that just really pissed them off, So they said a lot of nasty things about me after my departure. And I just tried to keep my mouth shut. And I wrote for the paper for 3 years, which I really enjoyed.
Did you?
And, there was a point, Brent, for 7 years, and you're not old enough to know this, but some of your viewers and listeners might. I was Tom Will's Joan Rivers. Now, Joan Rivers was Johnny Carson's permanent replacement for a long time. And for 7 years, I anchored the news.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it more than I thought. You can really have impact from that chair. And I don't know if you've ever sat in that chair. When you sit in that chair compared to the sports department, my wife said, you look like a freaking movie star. I mean,
my wife's never said that.
She said the lighting in that seat is so good. She goes, well, you're like over here doing the sports in the garage. And I said, I know. I sit there and I said, you can really tell the lighting is fantastic. But I really enjoy doing the news. You can have some impact. Particularly a lot of young people feel like that it's their job that the news is really not the news, that you need to kind of impart your opinion. And I can't tell you how many discussions I had with 24-year-old producers that the sentence the president argued and the president said are two very different sentences. And usually when I was in the news director's office, we would go over this, and 9 times out of 10, it ended up in crying, And I always wanted to quote Tom Hanks. There's no crying in TV, okay?
There really is.
This is
a lot of yelling.
This is our job. Yeah. There's no crying in TV. What are you crying about? So,
all right, let me ask you some quick hitters.
All right.
I don't know if they'll be that quick.
All right.
But favorite story?
really, obviously, breaking some of those things is memorable. But the favorite continuing story was when the Florida basketball team won back-to-back national championships. We covered them during the regular season, all the time. They played here occasionally, which they, I guess, still do, right?
Yeah.
I really got to be close to Billy Donovan. And as you know, when you cover a basketball team, there's only 12 guys and 4 assistants. So if you're in their locker room all the time, constantly after they're, beating up on JU or they're competing against Kentucky and you're there, they get to know you. Larry Shiat was one of the assistants.
Yeah, it's more intimate.
Yeah. You get to know these guys. I got to know Joakim Noah and Al Horford. Chris Richard was a real good buddy of mine and just a tremendous source of background information about what was going on with the team and how they were going to, attack certain teams, when they beat UCLA. I sat behind Jim Nance when they beat UCLA. I mean, Jim turned around and looked at me and goes, "Sammy, what are you doing?" I said, "I don't know. Our seats are usually in the rafters, but this is my seat."
Good press row.
Right. He was like, "Wow, excellent." So, you could hear everything that was being said on the court. And, you could hear the squeak of the tennis shoes. It was really kind of fascinating. But getting to know those guys and being close to them and them announcing that they're going to come back and do it again. There's video of me and Billy walking out of the Georgia Dome at about 2:30 in the morning. I waited around and just hung around with those guys. And Matt Kingston is backing up, taking this video. And you hear me say to Billy, that's the most impressive thing I've ever seen. And Billy looks at me and goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's one thing to say you're going to come back and do it. Whole other ball game to come back and actually do it."
Yeah.
That
was a cool ride.
Yeah.
Fun ride.
That was a great story. And to this day, when I see Billy, he'll hug me and he's just, he's a fine person and he was a phenomenal college coach. And just goes to show you that in the NBA, it's about the players, not about the coaches.
Yeah, they might extend if everybody still wants him. Sam Kouvaris with us on Storytellers of the 904. The job you almost left Jacksonville for. Is there one?
There are two. At the time, the company that I worked for was owned by the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
And they offered me the job in Miami at WPLG down there. And Linda and I decided we didn't want to raise our children in Miami. So that was, the one. And there were 2 times that I got very close to getting a network job. The one time, Friday afternoon, my phone rings, on the desk before cell phones. And I pick it up and the guy says, "Sam, Gordon Beck from USA Network." And we got calls from everybody all the time looking for video, looking for this. "Gordon, what can I do for you?" "It's actually what I can do for you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "We'd like you to host the PGA Tour broadcast that we do on the USA Network on Thursdays and Fridays." This is before the Golf Channel, before all that. And I said, "The job Ted Robinson has?" And he said, "Oh, you know the job?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Ted's pretty good at it." He goes, "He's leaving to become the voice of the San Francisco Giants." I said, "Okay. Well, yes." And he said, "Okay, good." I said, "Should I send you a tape?" And he said to me, "If Frank Cherkinian says you're the right guy, then you're the right guy. I'll send you the paperwork." I was like, "Okay." That very same day, there was a TV show called USA Today on TV. It was, they did, like they do in the paper where there's different colors. And one of the things was sports. And that show got canceled that day, same day, that Friday. And Bill McAtee was the guy hosting that. And his agent, Ed Hookstratton, called USA and said, you should hire Bill. And they said, "Well, Cherkinian and Terry Hansen at the PGA Tour think that Sam Kouvaris is the guy." He said, "Well, if you hire Bill, then we can negotiate this other thing." And so McAtee got the job. And I never heard from USA again. Not only did they not send me the papers, they never called me. So 5 years later, I'm at Commissioner's Hospitality in the old clubhouse.
Yeah.
Right? I'm walking out the back door. And as I walk out, I hear the door behind me open. And I'm still on that landing up top, where they used to invite us up there. And a guy says, "Hey, Sam." And I turn around, and he said, "I'm Gordon Beck." He had a very distinctive mustache. He had one of these walrus mustaches that, kind of. I said, "Gordon, I know exactly who you are." He said, "I owe you an apology." Probably should have been more gracious. I said, "Yes, you do." And so, that's one of the two different times but I realized after the second time it happened, obviously God had a different plan for me. I was supposed to be here, raise my kids. There was a reason that I'm here, that didn't happen. I got too close both times for it not to have happened.
Yeah.
So the plan obviously was something different.
All right, I've heard this story. I don't know if you've told me or other people have told me about the Muhammad Ali interaction. Is there a Muhammad Ali interaction?
So,
because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if I believe it or if it really happened or whatever.
1980, I'm the sports director at Channel 2 in Charleston. Phone rings at 6:45. Now, I had anchored, the late news the night before, so I'm asleep, And our news director at the time, a guy named Specs Munzel.
Great name.
Calls me. Real first name was Adrian, so he wore glasses, so he went by Specs. He, by the way, who officiated my wedding.
Really?
Yeah.
How about that?
He was also a pastor. But he calls me. He says, "Sam, I heard Ali is at the Mills House downtown." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "He's down there having breakfast." And I said, "The Mills House doesn't serve breakfast in their main dining room." And he said, "That's why I know it's him." I said, "Okay." So I jump out of bed, run a comb through my hair. I have a sports vehicle, right? And I've got a camera. I go down to the Mills House. It wasn't that far. I lived in Mount Pleasant. I get to downtown Charleston, park out front. You're on TV in the 80s. Everybody knows you, right? Because that's back when people watched TV. I park right out front. I grab my camera. The bell guy's like, "Hey, Sam." I said, "Is the champ in there?" He goes, "Yeah, he's in the back." So I walk in, and I don't know if you've ever been in the Mills House. Beautiful hotel, white columns, white tablecloths to the floor. And in the back, there's a young black guy sitting to the left on this table, and there's a lawyer who's facing me, and the guy with his back to me is unmistakably Ali, right? And so I'm standing there. I left my camera. I walk up to the table, and the lawyer, Jerry, looks at me and goes, "Hey, Sam." I go, "Hey, Jerry." He goes, "This is Reggie." I go, "Hey, Reg, how are you?" He goes, "Of course, you know the champ." And I looked, and Ali looks up at me, and I said, "Hey, champ." I said, "Hey, I'm Sam Kouvaris from Channel 2 here in Charleston." I said, I don't want to interrupt you guys. When you're done, on your way out, if I could literally have 1 minute to talk to you, I'd really appreciate that. Ali looks up at me, and he goes, "Have you eaten?" And I said, "No, but I'll be right here. And he goes, "Well, have you eaten?" I said, "No." He pulled the chair out and he said, "Well, sit down." And next 2 hours, I'm sitting there with Ali having breakfast, talking about, and if you go on my website, there's a picture of me and him. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Some of my friends say I wouldn't even recognize it was you. But yeah, there's a picture of me and him. And he went to throw a punch at me when we stood up. And I went like that, and he dropped his hands. And he said, "I'm not fighting you." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because you've boxed." I said, "How do you know that?" He said, "Nobody who hasn't been in the ring turns and gives you a smaller target and ducks behind their hands." He said, "You've obviously boxed." I said, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Yeah." And then he threw 3 punches that touched the end of my nose. That, 13th of it, they did that study. 13th of a second is quicker than you blink. So he looks like he never threw a punch because his hand's already back here when you blinked, but you're seeing stars. So yeah, that was
that's gonna be one of the cooler stories. That happened early.
That was very early on, and I remember it very vividly to this day. And he actually had taken a red eye. Reggie was being arraigned for cocaine distribution, and Ali taken the red eye to come in town to be a character witness for this guy.
How about that?
Yeah, kind of fascinating.
All right. How big was the rivalry with you and Hick?
Me and Dan?
Yeah. Was it?
Dan's a close friend of mine, and he's helped me run my life in a couple of situations, and I'm indebted to him. But we were competitors in terms, again, of breaking stories. When Dan came to work for me, he ended up going over to Channel 12 to work for Harmon Wages. And eventually, when they got rid of Harmon, they hired two guys, John Lawrence and Gary Gupton, and then they gave Dan the weekend job, even though he was Harmon's producer. They gave him the weekend job. So, he kind of grew up in that environment. I had a chance to kind of make a lot of mistakes in Charleston and decided what kind of on-air person I wanted to be. And, I speak about this often. There's 4 stages of being on TV, and the first and the last are you're terrified, right? Right?
Got to get over that first one.
That first one you got to get past, but eventually you're going to get there again.
Yeah.
Because like you're I tell people, they ask me about you, Brent's the same, and that's a high compliment because you're willing to go on the air and be yourself. There's a lot of people who get stuck in that act like yourself, And Dan was able to realize that I kind of had cornered the market on the be yourself kind of, I wouldn't say serious, but, common sense, normal. Delivery. And so Dan kind of created a persona. If you know Dan personally, you know that the guy on the air is a little bit goofier than the guy that he really is. He's much quieter. He's got a kind of a sardonic sense of humor. He's very funny. He's very friendly. Very thoughtful, but on the air, he doesn't portray that character. But he was able to make that work because he knew that was something different that wasn't happening in town. So to this day, I still consider him a good friend of mine.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's a heck of a run, obviously, that really both you guys had in Jacksonville sports, and you guys had at Channel 4, one that the way the medium is now and everything else won't be duplicated.
No, Tom and Deborah and George and I were the longest-running 4-person anchor team in the history of television.
Pretty amazing.
And it sounds wild. Of course, TV's only been around since the 50s,
That's true.
late 40s. But still, I mean,
that's most of our lives for everybody.
Right. When you think about it, for us to be together for that long, and Tom and I sat next to each other for 37 years, and it would have been 42 if it was up to me. And, Deborah decided to retire, and once we became an independent. But, I like to think that it's a testament to the people of Jacksonville who responded to honesty and plain spokenness, so to speak. I didn't have a big act. It was just always me. 20% of the people didn't like me. I knew that. My reputation is Sam's an asshole. But that's what people say. But you live with that. That's just what I did.
Why do people say that?
I think because I have and had an air of self-confidence that was kind of sometimes misinterpreted as arrogance. And I probably didn't do a very good job of separating the two, when I was younger. But I think that was part of it. But I can't tell you how many times I would play golf with somebody or whatever, and they would say to me, "You're not as big an asshole as I thought." So,
well, thank you.
Thank you. I think, but I always joke. Like you mentioned that recently I narrated a book for Audible.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to get.
It was a big challenge. Had to learn a lot. Had to become the audio engineer, and so you get feedback. I mean, because we've sold thousands of books around the world, so everybody's listening. So everybody's got something to say, and I want to write back to all the people who are criticizing me. Hey, listen, you want to give me grief? You got to get in line, okay? You just can't.
Used to it.
You got to take a number. You can't just jump to the front of the line. I mean, I've been taking grief for 45 years. Are you kidding?
What a cool project, though.
Oh, it was great. It's a guy that I know who I really admired. He, in fact, in the 90s, I had a notion that at the time Cecil Field was a master jet base, that the most fittest group of athletes in town were Navy jet pilots. And I knew the admiral who authorized me to, if I could pass the tests, both physical and mental tests, that they would allow me to get some F-18 time and go out to the ship and land. So I have 3 carrier landings.
That's awesome.
And in the F-18, and 3 launches, obviously. But that's the kind of opportunities that you have when you've been here long enough.
Yeah, the book is called High End, by the way.
High End by Kevin Miller. And Kevin and I actually flew together. I have 10 hours in the Hornet, which is apparently a lot for a civilian because I've flown with the Blue Angels, and 2 different times I did stories with squadrons that were out there, and so much so that I was sitting next to the Commodore one day out at Cecil at lunch, and he said to me, "How many hours you got in the Hornet?" I said 10. He goes, "That's a lot for a civilian." I said, "Really?" He said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Nothing. Can you come to lunch?" "Sure." So I came to lunch the next day, and he, they give the pilots 1,000 hour, 2,000 hour, 3,000. When you've got 1,000 hours in the F-18, it says McDonnell Douglas FA-18, and it says 1,000 hours. He made some sailor de-stitch the last 2 zeros, and he had this ceremony and presented me a 10-hour patch.
That's cool.
It's one of the things that motivated me to become a pilot, by the way.
Wow.
Which I did 25 years ago. But I took that and I said to him, "This will be the greatest conversation piece in the aviation community." I put it right on my flight jacket, and I wear it to this day.
That's awesome.
And everywhere I go, other pilots go, "The hell is that?" And it's a great conversation.
That's
starter.
a pretty good life. And by the way, over $5 million raised in charities, dreams come true, and other golf tournaments and things. You've done a lot with the community. Can't not close this out with mentioning that. But I have 2 questions to ask you. When you think of Jacksonville sports, what or who do you think of?
When I think of Jacksonville sports, well, I've never been asked that before. My mind goes to Jake Godbold as the guy who had the vision. And without his motivation and without his vision, we wouldn't have become kind of the sports town that we became. And it also, I'd say Wayne Weaver, because he had plenty of opportunities to not bring the team here or to take the team elsewhere once it was here, and he stuck with Jacksonville. And from 30,000 feet, those are the 2 guys I think of. I think of Artis Gilmore, who kind of put Jacksonville on the map when they went to the finals in 1970 at Cole Fieldhouse, by the way, at Maryland. That's where where they held the finals. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Timmy comes to mind, but he's such a massive star now, and I know he lives over there in Glen Kernan, but I mean, I've known Timmy since he was 11. I mean, so it
feels almost bigger than Jacksonville.
Yeah,
at times,
I mean, he feels huge, and I'm very proud of kind of what he continues to do. I had Peter King ask me one time, "Well, I just talked to Tebow for 45 minutes." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Is that real?" I said, "It really is.
Every bit of it."
He was like, "Come on." I was like, "No, yeah, absolutely."
My quest to stump Sam: when will the Jags win a Super Bowl?
When will they win the Super Bowl? If Tank Bigsby has a big year this year, I think they have a chance to make waves in the AFC. They're not better than Kansas City, and they're not better than Buffalo, and they may not be better than Baltimore. But these guys, the fact that they went and got the best player in the draft, they're the only administration of the Jaguars that would have ever done that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've told people, would you have liked to have Larry Fitzgerald? Yeah, he was the pick before us, and they had a chance to go get him, and they didn't. Well, he's going to the Hall of Fame. Can you imagine what the Jaguars would have been with him on the team? So if you have a chance to go get the best player, go get him. And, these guys are, of course, Gladstone really learned under the foot of Les Snead, which, they're enamored with guys who can play, not draft picks that may show up in the future. And I think that's good. And I think, when your second read is who's going to come and kill me, your first read, Trevor's first read is downfield, and his second read has to be here. It's hard to play that position, and hopefully the retooling of the offensive line has done that. I think that it'll be hard for them to get out of the AFC as long as Kansas City and Buffalo continue to retool. But I don't see Josh Allen and other quarterbacks in the league being able to play at that high of a level for that long. And I think Trevor can elevate his game to that and carry them in some situations. I mean, if they were to win the Super Bowl in 5 years, let's say, it wouldn't surprise me.
How about that? Well, we'll find out if you're right, and maybe we'll invite you back for the Super Bowl coverage.
Appreciate that.
On that one. One of the best storytellers ever to exist.
You'd be the first person from Channel 47 to ever call me back, by the way. Your former general manager was so rude to me. I was like, all I did was ask a question here, but that's okay. I'll always take your call.
We appreciate it for taking this. One of the best storytellers in the 904, Sam Kouvaris. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Brent.
When it's time to get a new car for anyone in your family, just remember, nobody but Nimnick, the #1 Buick GMC dealer in Jacksonville. Get the latest price breaks on 2023 and 2024 models or the newest 2025 vehicles in the showroom on Phillips Highway, or shop online at nimnickbuickgmc.com 24 hours a day. GMC Sierras, Yukons, and the redesigned Acadias, or get the all-new redesigned line with Buicks. It's nobody but Nimnick, and part of the reason why is this is a first-class buying experience here at Nimnick Buick GMC. You're not just a customer, you're a friend. This is about getting a vehicle that best fits you and getting you on the road, and also helping you and your family down the road. Nimnick has a treating you right guarantee, courtesy, respect, fairness. The most Buicks, GMCs, and Jacksonville's only Car Bravo dealer, nobody but Nimnick. Who has put in the most years and stands behind a better experience? Nobody but Nimnick. GMC. We are professional grade.
If you look good, you feel good, and the medical professionals here at Ponte Vedra Vein and Aesthetics are here to make you feel your best. I'm on camera every week, and I have a confession to make. I'm not always confident in my appearance. Can you see my dark circles? Is my makeup highlighting my fine lines instead of covering them up? I question it all. So when I found out about the wide variety of procedures here at Ponte Vedra Vein and Aesthetics, I knew help was just one appointment away. Medical Director Dr. Megan Deacon Casey and her board-certified physicians have been using the latest in cutting-edge technology for the last 10 years, giving men and women their personal confidence boost. From Botox, fillers, Morpheus 8, and so much more. The hardest part was figuring out what I needed. Thankfully, the medical team walked me through what would work best for me through a free consultation. Come look and feel your best with the team here at Ponte Vedra Vein and Aesthetics. Visit them at one of their 2 locations, either over in Ponte Vedra or on the south side.
I've been telling you about CGC Water Treatment and Plumbing for a long time now. Their drinking water systems remove up to 99% of contaminants. We've had a Connecticut water softener and drinking water system in our home for more than 7 years. You can see the difference whether you're washing clothes, the dishes, or what I like to do most, fill this up for some coffee every morning, and mostly all day. Remember, if you're not filtering your water, you are the filter. Don't be the filter. Right now, you can get a free Connecticut reverse osmosis system with the purchase of a Connecticut Premier Softener. The experts at CGC Water Treatment and Plumbing will test your water for free and determine your water score. Don't know your water score? CGC will find out and recommend the appropriate Connecticut water treatment solutions so you can improve it. Call 904-552-1242 or visit cgcwater.com. Ask about our 90-day love it or leave it guarantee. CGC Water Treatment and Plumbing, an authorized independent Connecticut dealer. Florida license number CFC 1432579.